Hello, and welcome to Prophecy Wednesdays, where we look at various things in the news and correlate them to Bible passages. One of the things that I've always been told is, Dave, you talk about these earthquakes everywhere. You talk about all this stuff. Where do we find that in the Bible? Where can I find it in the Bible to know that this is actually a sign? So I want to work on that today. I want to look at some of these titles in the paper and see if we can find those things in the Bible and how they correlate. One of the most horrific things that have happened in the last week is we've had a major earthquake in Myanmar. It's affected all the way to Thailand. There's some phenomenal videos out there. I think one of the most scariest one I think is not only the buildings just falling down, but there was one where there was a couple laying on a raft on the very top floor of a hotel, and this hotel has what they call a forever pool, and it looks like there is no lip. You can just see it just looks like it goes on forever. And that earthquake comes and they get out of that pool just in time as that pool is sloshing around and all their floating devices went over the edge. It's pretty dramatic, pretty dramatic thing that's happened over there. I have an article here that says death toll in Myanmar is approaching 20,000 as a desperate search for survivors and to find out what everybody's went. Now, I have a cousin who is married to a man from Myanmar, and they run a school in Yangon, and we went to visit them. And it's very neat the ministry that they have over there, and to see Yangon, Myanmar. We went through, and just to kind of give you an idea how the country is, it's very I would call it 1950s, 60s, 50s. The people are very nice, very cordial. Everybody's pretty nice. Very restrained. There's not a lot of pornography just everywhere. People don't use cuss words every day. I would call it like a 50s society. And the thing that just really got me was their scaffolding. They're working on a building, they're repainting this building, and the scaffolding is just bamboo tied together. They don't even have planks. They have one foot on the bamboo and one arm holding on to it, and then they're working with the other arm at tremendous heights. The 6, 7, 8 stories high, and they just have bamboo scaffolding. Most of the people don't even wear shoes, and it's bizarre. I'm walking down the road and I'm watching some construction workers work, and this guy's welding, and he's welding with no shoes on, in shorts and a t-shirt or a tank top, and he's welding by looking at it. Then he covers his eyes with his hands and does the welding without seeing his weld. Very very old school type of building over there. Of course, none of their facilities are built to withstand earthquakes, as they don't normally have earthquakes, especially something of this magnitude. Very, very unusual earthquakes that we have over there. Now, we can have earthquakes all over the earth. In fact, I live in Kansas, and there's actually a fault line between Kansas and Missouri, and there are earthquakes that happen in this area. Of course, they're nothing like what you would see like in California or Japan or something like that, where you're expecting it, and those places build for that. But I did notice there was another article in here talking about earthquakes in Indonesia, and so earthquakes is becoming a pretty rampant thing. And I've always been told, Dave, when the last days get here, we're going to see earthquakes everywhere. It's going to be all over the place. Where do you find this in the Bible? How do I know that this is actually a true statement? Well, if you turn to Matthew 24, Matthew 24 is, we'll set this up just a little bit. And I'm actually doing a teaching series on this. And you can go over to Teaching Tuesdays. And we're going through Matthew 24, in fact, right now, and going through it verse by verse. But this, I just want to talk about what we see here and how we know what these signs are and what are they signs of and what do they mean. So, Matthew 24, the disciples are with Jesus and they've just come out of the temple area, and the disciples are showing Jesus all of these buildings around here, Herod's temple and all that stuff. And Jesus says to them, He says, "See ye not all these things? Verily I say unto you," this is in verse 2 of chapter 24, There shall not be left here one stone upon another that shall not be thrown down. And I imagine that was a pretty big statement for the disciples to hear, that all this was going to be destroyed. It says in verse 3, it says, "And he sat down upon the Mount of Olives, and his disciples came unto him privately and asked, Tell us, when shall these things be, and what shall be the sign of thy coming and the end of the world?" Now, you have to put yourself in the place of the disciples. A lot of people will try to say that this passage has to do with the church, and it has to do with end times, and I agree that it has to do with end times, but I don't find the church in here for three reasons. The first reason is the church has not been established yet. Jesus has not died on the cross. Jesus is still coming as Messiah to his chosen people. Once they reject him, he will die on the cross, rise again the third day, and he will start the church in Acts on the day of Pentecost. So Jesus has not started the church. The disciples know nothing about the church. In fact, they're not expecting Jesus to die. He's told them several times now, I have to die and I will be raised again the third day. But they haven't understood that. They have no idea that's really what's going to happen. And so Jesus says all this stuff is going to be destroyed. And the disciples come to him and say, well, Master, we know certain things. We know that Daniel has prophesied there's going to be 70 weeks of time. And so they know that the end is coming. They know at the 70th week that the end will be here, and that Jesus or the God will come again, and all these bad things are going to happen. They know this is going to happen. So that's number two. Number three, it says in most of Paul's writings, he calls the church and the prophecies to church mysteries. They weren't ever known in the Old Testament. In fact, a lot of the prophets that wrote in the Old Testament had no idea what they were writing about. And they had no idea that there was a church that was going to exist. There's a fantastic picture, and if I can find it, I'll put it in the stream here. Um, Clarence Larkin drew a picture that showed how the Daniel could look through time at the Bible prophecy and see what he would call the mountaintops. Here's this is going to happen, then this is going to happen, this is going to happen, but he couldn't see the valleys, and so the church is in a valley. Uh, you don't see the church mentioned in the Old Testament. So the disciples had no idea there was going to be a church. They had no reason to believe this. And when we get to the end of the chapter, we'll talk a little bit about that for fun. But if you look at this, they come to Jesus and they say, When is this going to happen? And in their mind, if the temple was destroyed, everything has to be undone. This has to be the end of times. Everything's destroyed. And this is when Jesus takes this and he answers them backwards. So his answer, starting in verse 4, he actually answers the end of the world question. Now, this is very interesting. It says, Take heed that no man deceive you, for many shall come in my name, saying, I am the Christ, and shall deceive many. Now, when it says many here, that many is unbelievers, people who are not Israel and not a believer in God. He will deceive those people, and they will follow the Antichrist, or the beast, and the beast system, which is the one world system. And that's something we can get into another time. And I talked a little bit about that in the previous show. And he says, Ye shall hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that ye be not troubled, for all these things must come to pass, but the end is not yet. For nation shall rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there shall be famines and pestilences and earthquakes in divers places. All these are the beginnings of sorrow. Now, this is where we look at and we say, Jesus said these things are going to happen, and as they happen, this is going to be the beginning of the time of sorrow, or Jacob's sorrow, or Jacob's trouble. This is the beginning of the 70th week. And here's where we can see these things are starting to happen and they're going to ramp up. It says over in Revelation that it's like a woman who travails in childbirth. They're going to get closer and closer together, and more intense, and we're going to see earthquakes everywhere. We're going to see pestilences everywhere. We're going to see all this stuff everywhere. Wars and rumors of wars, uh, nation against nation, kingdom against kingdom. All these things are going to get worse and worse and worse, all the way into the tribulation, where they're going to be infinitely worse. And then in the middle of the tribulation, it says, then they will kill you. They will hunt you down. It says, they should deliver you up to be afflicted. They should kill you, hated of all nations for my name's sake. And then many will be offended and will betray one another and hate one another. And many false prophets will rise and shall deceive many. Because of the iniquity shall abound, the love of many shall grow cold. But he that endures unto the end, the same shall be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness to all nations, and then shall the end come. So here's Jesus saying it's going to get worse, 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 and then it's going to get even more terrible. And he breaks that down in verse 15 and explains what that point is in great detail. And I don't think we'll make it there today because I wanted to concentrate on this first part. Here we have in verse 7, verse 6 and 7, what we get from here's where the tribulation is going to start. This is how we know we're getting to the end of time, that these things are going to get worse and worse and worse. And you say, well, how do you know that for sure, Dave? Well, if you go over to verse 32, this kind of gives you an answer here. It says in verse 32, it says, now learn a parable of the fig tree. When his branches is yet tender and putteth forth leaves, you know that summer is nigh. So likewise, when you see these things, know that it is near, even at the doors. Verily I say unto you, this generation shall not pass till all these things been fulfilled. So Jesus is saying, just like when you see a fig tree with little buds on it, and you can see the leaves coming out, and we're in that time of year now. You go outside and all the trees are starting to bud, grass is starting to turn green. I know that spring's coming. Now, we just had snow the other day. It got really warm out. This next week is supposed to be really cold, but we know that spring is leading into summer, and before you know it, it's going to be 100 degrees every day. We know it's coming. We can see it coming. And just like that, in verse 6 and 7, these are signs that the end is coming. Now, wars and rumors of wars is very, very unique, especially when he breaks it down even further and says nation against nation and kingdom against kingdom. And when he says kingdom against kingdom, he's talking about like Russia versus Ukraine, or Israel versus everybody else, or Israel versus Hamas, or Israel versus Syria. This could be like United States versus Russia, or United States versus whoever, Mexico, in an actual armed conflict. And that's what we think of when we normally think of war and rumors of wars. But it also says kingdom against kingdom. That breaks it down to city versus city. This is internal strife inside of countries. One example would be civil war. How many civil wars are going on right now? How many internal struggles are going on right now? We see several in the United States. We see all over the EU. We actually see some from all the infiltrators. We look at people coming across the southern border and the northern border. It's kind of like an invasion. Trump has got in there and has really shut that down, but all sorts of bad characters have come across that border. It's just not people that we would call Mexicans that have come across that border. It is all sorts of bad characters, all these gangs. We have people from Iran were being stopped. Hamas is being stopped. We've got all sorts of evilness inside this country. And so that's waiting to come about. We also look at Islam coming into America, and we can see already in some of the northern states, Islam is the law of the land, and that's actually against the law. We go over to the UK, and the UK has a problem too, and so does Germany. All these places have allowed themselves to be taken over by a hostile enemy, and they've come in and taken things over, and now there's infighting and strife inside that country, and they're fighting for their very existence. Then it says famines, pestilences, and earthquakes in diverse places, which means various places, places that normally don't see this. You're going to see an uptick in earthquakes all over the earth as everything's coming to a head and everything coming to a close. We're going to see more and more earthquakes. We're going to see more and more pestilences and more famines. And we see that with the COVID-19. We see we're being told there's going to be another epidemic soon. So there's your pestilences. There's people around the earth that are starving. It's getting more and more out of hand. And it's interesting that we have all the food that you could ever need, but yet people are still starving in various locations. As these things get worse and worse, we're moving toward the time of the tribulation. This time of tribulation, the church will not be here. The church is never discussed in here. This is the time, my friend, to put your faith in the Lord Jesus Christ and not get involved in this. To put your faith in Jesus Christ. He came down to this earth and died for you on the cross and took your sin, your wrath upon himself, that you might forever live free, that you would live with him forever. Friend, I ask you to put your faith in him today. Until next time, have a great week.